Hello everyone, and thank you for joining XROM Podcast. I'm your host Eddie Avil. XROM Podcast is designed to celebrate, showcase and shape the AR, VR, MR industry and to help you understand and learn about this transformational technology which holds potential to change the way we live, work and play. Christopher Lafayette is a man on fire, a serial entrepreneur with the vision, passion and mission to take XR to everyone. He is the founder of Immersive Directory, Armada, Flotilla and Holo-practice. He encourages collaboration, inclusivity and diversity in building immersive technologies. You see him on LinkedIn, Twitter and AR/VR conferences all around the world. He is brilliantly articulate and happy to call him a friend and an inspiration. Wish you enjoy the conversation. Thank you for joining XRM Podcast, Chris. Really appreciate this, you taking time out and doing this for us. So VR is looking nice. CES just got concluded and there's been some nice news in the CES. So where do you think VR is going to go in the year 2020?
I think right now, the most important thing that we should be looking at when it comes to VR, where I think it's going to be heading, is better content creation and development. Mm-hmm. We've had quite a few different headsets that have arrived in 2019. For the very most part, are very spectacular. We just now developed what I consider sight. Even though XR is still in the womb, it's good for the time now present. And so with the headsets that have arrived, in which the companies that have made them have spent a lot of time in creating them, anywhere from the Index to the Quest to Vario, and there's so many more. Good hardware deserves good content. And so a lot of platforms over the last 24 to 36 months, even though they've made really good content, it's not up to par with the standards of the headset. So I expect to see a lot more content arrive this year.
Where do you think is the problem with the content? Because I mean, making content at this point in time, it's expensive, right? It's an expensive affair for building content. And right now, most of the bigger studios are waiting for the small players to kind of push drive the ecosystem, because like a player like a Facebook or maybe like a Microsoft, what they do is like they build the HMDs and they expect the young startups to kind of like push in the ecosystem and start building content. But at this point in time, do you see that there's like the distribution doesn't seem to be there in place. The monetization is still not there in place. And do you see those things as a problem? Because see, as a content creator, I mean, I have a content studio, right? I've been building content here in India for VR since early 2016. And my major drawback has been distribution and monetization. So do you think that is, as a problem, it needs to be solved so that startups all around the world or developer content creators says, okay, there's an opportunity. I mean, there's a hardware so that the consumers can go and buy that. And then I build content, and there is a legitimate, credible distributor platform, maybe like a Netflix. And so then I'll get it more. So do you see that there's a problem over there?
In regards to what specific, Eddie?
In regards to content creation, right? I mean, because see, if you create content and if there's no distribution platform and there's no monetization platform, how do I go about monetizing what I have built, right? I mean, and if there's no monetization, then I cannot sustain as a startup, right?
Well, first off, I think there's too many go-to-market platforms coming out right now. Mm-hmm. Because we still, even as those in the developer community, even as artists, we have to do a better job in helping to explain to consumers and enterprises exactly what this technology is. We cannot approach XR like we did the mobile apps revolution. Be more conscious and considerate of what it is that we're building and who is it that we're building for. We still, even on a monocle level, really don't even understand the magnitude of what this hardware has on us as humans itself as far as using these headsets and these HMDs. And so right now I'm at about an 80% favorability for 80% experiential content. And I think we need to see anywhere between 20 to maybe 30% go-to-market content. To your point, a lot of platforms are figuring out how do we monetize. And now isn't necessarily the time for smaller companies to get in that don't have some type of resources for bootstrap capital, friends and family investment, or even some generous small seed to help them get by. Because what they have to understand is that you're entering to a market where the consumer doesn't necessarily know what it is that they need to look for, or what they should be looking for, even on the enterprise level. There's a lot more education that has to go through when it comes to that. Now, the content that needs to be developed really should be playing, especially for simulation training and education, and especially in the medtech arena, really needs to play on human factors, physiological, psychological fidelity, contextual, environmental fidelity, intentional and unintentional fidelity. It needs to be able to make sense, and it needs, most importantly, to be compelling. If you're going to go from one reality to another, you need to make sure that it's worth going from one reality stage to the other. If the content for training and education isn't as compelling as traditional settings, and there's no reason to use it at all. It's just another fun factor, but it's not necessarily something where people are definitively going to be learning. And at the same time, lastly, at the moment, we need to make sure that we have data in place, whether it's eye tracking measurement, experiential, and putting in the right type of protocols to be able to better understand if people truly are learning and on what level and what percentage. And I believe that we haven't done a great job with actually collecting, aggregating, and filtering, refining through that data so that we can begin to make necessary iterations for development.
I completely agree with you that most of the startups, I guess, who start building content end up using VR as a novelty. And you rightfully said, I mean, data is so important. You need to figure out, I mean, if you're building content, you need to start collecting data. And you spoke about MedTech arena. You have a startup which is called Holo-practice, which is push driving that ecosystem. Yeah, can you elaborate a little bit more on what Holo-practice is doing and what's the future for Holo-practice?
Holo-practice is a medical immersive simulation incubator. So basically what we're doing is we're working with startups and platforms on the startup level, on the enterprise level, and we're taking in those platforms, we're advising those platforms, and we within ourselves internally are building out our own type of experiential platforms as well. For example, one of the things that we just announced at the Stereopsa conference in Belgium, which was a fantastic experience, and being able to go there, was at Brussels. We talked about one of the projects that we're building, of several projects that we have in stealth, but one of them is called the Immersive Womb, where we're creating a simulation of the conception to embryonic to fetal stage positioning, essentially the first and third trimester experience of what it is for someone to be able to look and explore inside the actual developing womb.
Wow.
Of a person that's in pregnancy, a woman that's in pregnancy in particular. So part of that is, what type of experience can we actually build when we're building on the senses? Because one of the things, Eddie, that we must understand, and like I said, we've just now developed sight, but virtual reality is not a single variable equation. Virtual reality is multivariate. That means when we deal with VR, we're dealing with sight, we're dealing with spatial sound, we're dealing with feel, haptics, you name it, smell. And so we just now developed that, but the content experiences of what the new HMDs, for example, when we look at the content that's coming, even in the medical arena, it really doesn't maximize and show forth the full power of what these headsets can do. And now if the headsets just landed, for the very most part, in their solid refinement for 2019, that means the majority of the content creators are almost obsolete, and they're almost dealing in obsolescence. That means they need to come up and scale their content to complement that. A big problem with what I'm seeing right now in the medical arena in particular is, just because you can make it doesn't necessarily mean it's good for using. I see a lot of asset-driven platforms that are being made with really poor artistry, really poor design, and it's functional, but again, it doesn't psychologically and physiologically speak to the human factors. And so if you don't have that right, for the very most part, entertainment can get away with that. But when you're talking about giving a training tool for a surgeon on a surgical theater training platform to be able to perform in a sterile environment, she or he needs the best headset and best training tools available to them And if we're using platforms and we're using content that doesn't really speak to what it is that they'll be visually identifying in the medical setting, then that's a problem, and that ultimately can really end towards not being able to do what they do best and what they're training for, and ultimately, I don't think any of us want to find ourselves in a situation where we're under operation with a surgeon that's coming right with bad content, training, development. So with Holo-practice, part of our big year one is laying out the processes and methods and the approach to healthcare XR. We've never been this way before. We're pioneers in a lot of ways. I tell people all the time, I'm not a founder, I'm not an entrepreneur in that regard. You're not a founder. A lot of us are pioneers. You know, if I wanted to go start a bank and develop some type of bank, there's a blueprint from centuries on how to operate a bank. If I want to go start a restaurant, there's a ton of examples on how to go start a restaurant. But if I want to start a new XR platform, if I want to start a new AI platform, with the idea of progression and to eventually monetize, to get it where it needs to go for scale, there's not a lot of blueprint on that. You can't look at the mobile apps revolution in a lot of ways for the blueprint, because those two don't add up in a major way. So there's a dichotomy difference in those two different narratives. So what we have to do is be better at documenting the process on which way to go, making sure that what we're putting out there to enterprise is to reduce technology fatigue, and make sure that we're putting our best foot forward in building that. And lastly, to your point at this moment, financially, that's difficult to do. That is going to be difficult to do. And let's be candid. Not every startup, just because you're a startup and have a desire to do it, doesn't mean that you should do it, because it's costly.
Right, completely. Yes, I mean, we are in uncharted territory, right? I mean, it's something extremely new, and we are all trying to kind of figure out where this thing is going to go, because I guess world over, all the players, from the developers, the content creators, the startups, the big companies, they're all just trying to figure this out of this technology, which is so potential and which could be so transformational, right? So, and you rightfully said, I mean, for a startup who's starting in, I mean, you need to be very conscious about what you're building. You need to build something which adds value to the consumers right now and not be so into the future, because you need to be sustainable. If you're not sustainable, I mean, you're gone, right? So where do you see the future of AR, VR heading in the next 5 years?
Within the next 5 years?
Right.
A really good question. I see a lot more designated spaces that have been developed in terms of holodecks, whereas dedicated specific places in residences and in commercial real estate properties. I think haptics will be much more refined within the next 3 years. In about 36 months, I think we'll have really good haptics that are going to be available. Within the 5-year bracket, I think it's going to be fantastic to experience VR when it comes to touch and feel. I think spatial sound will go through a serious refinement, especially in 2020 and 2021. I think sound is going to be really complementary, because when the new content comes by, more sound and audio engineers will have better ways and better examples to be able to use the content for better discovery on best use cases or best practices when it comes to audio, input and output. I think when we look at the advent of 5G, I think we're going to have more autonomy in using VR in places that we never necessarily thought we'd be using them. In tandem, I believe that we'll be using VR with AR glasses. I see that coming. When it comes to wearables and IoT, it's in terms of the ecosystem and the pairing of using such technology as spatial computing and XR, you're going to see a lot of that being worked with as far as within your wearable ecosystem that we'll all be walking around in. I think we're not going to see any significant leaps in 5 years. I don't see that coming. So we won't we won't see any significant leaps in 5 years. I think if you look, for example, because most of the industry is still in the trough of disillusionment.
Right.
We see a few platforms. I see a few platforms that look like they're headed on their way to the plateau of productivity. I think Oculus Quest is one of them. When we look at the plateau of productivity, I think Quest is one of them. I sure would like to see Valve Index be another one. And I'd like to see Vario on that way too. I think the problem with most of these platforms, including Quest, is that they don't have enough culture and eco-culture that's involved in its development. They don't have enough culture that's imbued and infused into the development cycle and throughout its whole ecosystem build out. I think once we have more culture involved in developing the hardware, I think once we have more content that's complementary, that's culturally related to everyone, right. I think there are better experiences and refinement. So Quest at the same time deals a lot in entertainment. Once it branches itself from that, I think it's going to be more of a fantastic platform. Platforms like Vario, they spend a lot of time and a lot of capital in developing a fantastic headset. But we can't expect all of them to know the way to go when it comes to marketing and branding. A lot of that, how do you compare a headset that's worth thousands of dollars versus one that's worth $500? To the consumer, even on the enterprise level, they don't know how to compare the difference in quality. They don't know what it is that they should be looking for. And so again, we have to be, and we must be educators of this technology in order to get our points across. And how we do that is not necessarily standing in front of a group of people telling them what it is, but showing them what it is through how we relate to things. We don't just, as humans, relate to words. We also relate to this good design and good art and good artistry. So there's more than one way to communicate and teach an audience.
We need to educate. There's a need at this point in time to educate people, because, see, besides the ones who are vested in the space, I mean, even if I kind of like step out, nobody knows what virtual reality is, right? I mean, they've heard the term, but they've not experienced it. So there's a larger need to go out and kind of bring in the people who don't know about this technology.
I mean, Eddie, a lot of people think that virtuality is a 90s video game.
Yeah.
If you go outside and ask 5 different people what's VR or even augmented reality, some may say Pokemon.
Right.
I've had to use Pokemon as the best familiar example of what AR is, and people that were playing that are avid Pokemon users, they don't even realize that's augmented reality. We ask a lot from big companies such as Apple and Google to come out with all of this spatial gear and headsets and all that, but it's like they're taking our, part of what we do in Silicon Valley, it may look like we're taking our time, but we're moving incrementally responsibly. The same thing, I mean, look at the HoloLens. You go from light field to, light to laser. There's a whole lot of transition between light to laser. That's a big jump, but I don't think that Microsoft has done a terrific job in really explaining and expressing what the HoloLens actually is. And you can't do it in a 30-second, in a 1.5, in a minute, in 1 minute and 30-second video, nor can you put the founder of HoloLens and expect everybody to sit down and watch an hour-long lecture on it. So we have to be creative, and we need to get marketers at the table, and we need to get brand developers and experts at the table to figure out how do we get this to the world. A big part of that, Eddie, will be experiential, not taxing everybody to be able to use a platform that they don't even know that they really want. Now, LBE, as far as location-based entertainment, they're doing a terrific job right now. I mean, they are the definitive gateway towards using this technology. So I doff my hat to what they're doing. I'm not a huge entertainment guy. That's not the industry that I'm in. But I know a lot of people that are in that space in LBE that have created some of the most beautiful content that I've ever experienced in this space. And it does well in playing on the human factors as well. But it's entertainment. So on the enterprise level, that's only going to get us so far vertically speaking. So how do we reach out to the other industries that we know that are going to need this, whether it's for manufacturing, whether it's for sports, whether it's for the medical industry? You know, how do we do a better job of reaching out to them? And that's a big part of what Holo-practice is about, is having dialogues and conversations with people that not only operate in hospitals, but build hospitals as well.
Yeah, and you rightfully said, I mean, LBs are doing a wonderful job by taking this technology to a larger number of people. So there's adoption becomes faster, right? And you mentioned about the companies like Oculus, Valve, Vario, and HoloLens, and thankfully, I mean, it was. But personally, I believe, I mean, there's a lot of flack which has gone to like a Magic Leap or a Facebook. But I guess if it was not for Facebook and Magic Leap, the industry wouldn't have been where it is. And it's largely because of, I think, Magic Leap, which is built the hype, and somehow I feel that the hype is needed for a larger audience to at least understand what this technology is all about. Maybe it's not good for you, and maybe too much hype is definitely not good for you, and that's the reason maybe Magic Leap had to pay a price for that. But I think they've done quite a decent job in taking out to the larger number of people what AR, VR, MR is. But on the same side, if you look at Microsoft, or maybe like a Vario, they are enterprise driven. All that they do is these annual conferences where they have like these, maybe just a talk about what the technology could do to enterprise, which doesn't go through a larger number of audience. So I personally feel that Oculus and Magic Leap has done a great job for the entire ecosystem to push the ecosystem forward. You have been an evangelizer since the longest time. I mean, you are seen across all the social media platforms, be it on LinkedIn, your Twitter, you're across all the, I mean, you're going around the world talking to, these conferences and stuff like that, So walk me through your journey, from an outsider perspective. It must look like it's damn easy, but I'm sure it's not. It's taken a couple of maybe years for you to get to where you are. So how's the journey been? Please walk me through your journey of Mr. Chris Lafayette.
It's been a powerful journey, but before I kind of dovetail into that, let me say this about Magic Leap. Magic Leap's funded over $6 billion. It's the biggest funded startup in the history of time, and they're not meeting and reaching the goals that they've set for themselves. That's largely due because they lack culture. Right. Magic Leap first came on the scene. A lot of what we saw was CGI. And their marketing and what we thought was the better promises of what they would deliver. And the consumer's eyes, they failed. But I've seen good content with Magic Leap. I've seen wonderful content with Magic Leap. I think Magic Leap has an identity issue. They have good leadership there. And they have a lot of smart talent. But that's just because you have smart talent doesn't necessarily translate into relatable products for the consumer who you look. And a lot of part of it is, I will say this, is that they need to hire more of the people that they want to buy their products. And I think they'll have a better cultural experience on the consumption level. That's all I'll say about Magic Leap right now. There's a lot more that could be said about that. Microsoft is a little bit different. Now, to the point of, and I'm a fan of both of them, by the way. For me, as far as this journey, it's been one that's a powerful experience. In some ways, I never thought that I see myself traveling around the world and speaking to venues, and speaking to individuals and meeting people from such diverse backgrounds and unfamiliarity from where I'm from. It's been rich in the experience. I have an opportunity to listen to so many different people from different countries and from different continents about what they're building, some of their hardships, some of the things that, the obstacles that may seem easier for someone in Silicon Valley or me from Silicon Valley is easier to challenge, easier to meet. For them, it's bigger. I think there's a lot of smart technologists around the world that nobody knows exist. Right. And not just individuals, but whole teams of people, Eddie, that are building fantastic hardware, fantastic content, and that are thinking about what's next in spatial what's next in AI, what's next on a number of different emergent technologies that abide in what I call the eco-habitat. The eco-habitat is a place where all emergent technologies abide in, and they all have their own autonomy. AI has its own autonomy with its subsets of machine learning and deep learning and chatbots and smart assistants, and spatial computing, or XR, has its own autonomy with virtual, augmented, mixed reality, haptics, physiohaptics, roboticism, IoT, wearables, fintech, so forth and so on. But what happens when these technologies begin to scale and grow as they are now? They're not new. This isn't new technology. My predecessors have been building this for decades. But what happens when these technologies begin to grow and scale and come together with what I call the merge pairing? On a amorphous scale, we really don't know what that's going to look like with that type of cross-pollination, and looking at the technological convergence outcome of really what we're looking at is the fundamental foundations of the actual smart city. We don't know how it's going to behave. We don't know how it's going to breathe. We don't know how it's going to move. We don't know what it's going to smell like. So a lot of this is so unfamiliar arena that, again, what I've seen is what I've done is take a step back and take a step up and look at what's being developed and built now. And for the very most part, encouraging a number of different industries that if you're going to build artificial intelligence, make sure that you're building it unbiasedly. If you're going to extend reality, be sure to bring reality with it. That's really important, because if we don't, then we're not going to sell and hit the numbers that we want to hit in terms of on the consumer level, or on just, really wanting to get that type of income in for the growth that's necessary for any ecological system to thrive and survive on under the banner of technology itself. So for me, a lot of it has been listening and has been talking, but really taking leadership and taking the necessary approach to drive this entire industry. I'm not alone. There's other people out there, a lot of very capable women and men who are allies, and I'm allies with and familiar with, and some of them I'm not. But I have a really good support from a lot of different people. I hear from people all the time and that follow me, and there's a lot that they contribute to my understanding and growth when it comes to business, if you will. For me, it's all spiritual. That comes first. That means the most to me. And to make sure that we're being good stewards, Eddie, of what it is that we're building and that we care. So that's my word for 2020 is care. Care more. Care more about what we build. Care more about who we build with. Care more about the people that are building things that are going to help you along your way in your journey. Care. Somebody has to care for what we're doing. And I see so much of that already, but let's put more emphasis on that. Care about, the planet that we're building in. All those things are important, and care for one another, Eddie.
So true. I think we are at the cusp of some insane changes which is going to happen, which is technologically, the environment and things like that. And what we are building, I believe, will define our coming future, right? And I see all of these technologies converging together. You rightfully said, AI, your 5G, your cloud computing, your IoT, all of these going to come together and possibly maybe build something which is going to define our coming tomorrow. And we need to be so careful in building that. We need to, break out of our silos functioning and kind of get everybody involved, all the countries involved, because you're the biggest proponent of build together. Do you think that, all your posts are with build together? And I see that, I feel that, because I feel that the future is collaborative. I feel that in another possibly 15, 20 years, we're going to go towards the hive mind where we all connect together and we build a good future. That's the only way we can build a good future. Otherwise, we go towards dystopian side, right? Where everybody is working on silos and everybody is creating a arms race because people are creating artificial intelligence. To kind of like for wars and stuff like that. But the only way to like come together, to make a beautiful world is when we come together. So, what, according to you, needs to be done to build a culture of inclusivity and diversity? What needs to be done?
Well, I think first of all, there's a lot that you said there, and Eddie, the big part of it is identifying what I call eco-culture.
Right.
There's a great disconnect when we talk about diversity, and I've talked to a lot of diversity leads in Silicon Valley, and if you ask several different diversity leads in Silicon Valley, what's the definition of diversity? I guarantee you'll get 7 different answers for what that is. I think if we look at eco-culture, which really is the native state of what I call diversity, eco-culture is human characteristics permeated in and out technological ecosystems, or really human biological characteristics permeated in and out technological ecosystems. And we tend to look at Google as a company, as an inanimate platform, but it's an animate platform. Google is humans. Facebook are humans.
Yeah.
Apple are humans, but in tech, we have a tendency in the world, we tend to look at it as a machine. And it does function like a machine, but it's very much a human ecologically balanced and centered machine. And so the more that you add into an eco habitat or ecosystem, the more differences you add in there, the better your platform is going to be built and identified from other familiar characteristics that identify with a single part of that ecosystem, because it was built with familiarity from someone that comes from where they come from. No matter the color, no matter the gender, right?
Yeah.
It all matters. Everyone needs to contribute. And so when it comes to places like Southeast Asia and Asia, Europe, Africa, it's time for us to all start to build with our own autonomy, because the hive mind, when we start talking about communication, the biggest advancement that's been developed in technology over the last 10 years is communication.
Right.
There's nothing more advanced on the face of this planet than communication that's been of the greatest benefit. The mere fact that you and I are sitting here on this call with the low latency levels, we couldn't have had this conference 10 years ago. You see Zoom, you see them all. You see Zoom and Blue Jeans and Hangouts and Skype and so many other different conferences. And we're able to communicate in ways and share files and information in ways we've never been able to. That's benefited the whole technology community, all the artist community, all of that. The cloud system, how we're able to operate, the way we're able to share. So indeed, the hive mind is coming. In years to come, when you start to look at telepresence and start to look, we'll be having this conversation face to face, human eye resolution, haptic feedback, handshakes, drinking a cup of tea from where you're at and me having a cup of tea where I'm at, delivered by a drone. So when you start thinking about what we're doing right now, Eddie, is we are the beginnings of that hive mind. We are contributing to that. And sometimes, as someone said a long time ago, someone I care for a lot, he said, sometimes you really don't know what you're in until you're out of it or look back on it to realize that you were in something. We're in that right now when it comes to communication, development, and collaboration. One of the reasons that I talk about build together is because I think that's the most essential thing that we could do, not just from a point of inspiration and enthusiasm or motivation. That is from the necessity of being able to contribute to this massive behemoth, this massive thing that's being built right now, which is the smart city. And the smart city isn't necessarily concrete and tangible. Just like the biggest store in the world has no walls. It has no borders. Amazon. And look at Alibaba. So when you start to look at these digital constructs, the idea was never for us to stay staring at the devices that we have with us today, our laptop, desktop, tablet, phone. The idea was to get inside of these devices and operate digitally within that. Even on the physical world, in the physical construct, everything is slowly, surely will become more smarter. AI is going to operate and touch every single different emergent technology in the eco-habitat. It's one of the few emergent technologies that touches all of them and has such a profound influence on them. So the way that we buy and sell, the way that we trade, the way that we care, the way that we communicate, the way that we heal, the way that we perform surgeries, when it comes to robotic systems, when it comes to robots assisting surgeons, all of that's on the way. But if we don't have proper protocols and approaches to communication, if we don't have an Earth to be able to do it in the first place because of climate change or the need for climate correction, there's so many things that we're facing that are against us. But we need to start to work on the communication that we have available today. That is good for now, and we haven't really embraced communication and collaboration on the level that I think we can globally, Eddie. You know, you shouldn't, I mean, I hear from people in India, I have a lot of care, including with you, Eddie, from India. It is a shame in a lot of ways that the vendors that we have here available to us in the States and in Silicon haven't found their way over there yet. Now, some are being more careful about their rollout to make sure, and they're using extreme caution. But now we have the tools and the capability, even on the investor level, to fund startups globally and to really start building out these products. But the biggest problem that I see with that, including in Europe, is that some of the best platforms that I've seen in 2019, nobody knows they exist, and they don't have the budget to simply say, hello, we're here. They're in a very big ocean on a very small boat, and nobody knows that they exist.
Yeah, I mean, India, we have around 1.23 billion people. We've got some amazing startups. We've got developers, content creators doing some awesome stuff. But then we are completely overlooked. And I'm sure the same thing's happening for other countries, like maybe in Europe or Africa or other Southeast Asian countries. America seems to be leading this, and some of the top investors are sitting over there. Do you think a dialogue needs to be built where they need to actually look at these startups from around the world who are doing some exceptional things, and possibly are the ones who could be possibly building the next Facebook or Google?
This is a really good question. Oftentimes when I travel and I'm looking at people face to face, as you and I are now, and they're telling me that they just don't have access. And a lot of these technologies are really good. And they're prototype, and they're in their beta, they're ready to come out of beta. They've done all the right things that they should for a startup, but they just don't have access to proper capital and the proper investors. And at the same time, when I talk to a lot of investors, they're constantly looking for real refined talent because they have to go through so many different pitch decks, and the majority of it, those startups just aren't ready. And so how do you bridge the gap and build the bridge from the startup team or platform to the investors? And those are more of what we need to build, and that's one of the reasons why I talk about build together and communication. If not people like you and I, who are going to be the ones to step up and to build these platforms to provide global and greater transparency so that people, whether they're in a state like Utah back here in the United States, or they're in a place like Punjab, how do people become more aware technologically aware of what's being developed and where, because good technology shouldn't be predicated on this type of discoverability. There should be a more streamlined way and approach that's being developed. And I think a lot of times that we build and what we build when it comes to tech, we're building for the consumers, but sometimes I think it's best to consider building for the actual process itself for discoverability. You know, when you look at how many apps now abide within Play Store or an iOS, Apple Store, you have to go outside of that to go to different manuals and go to different articles, whether it's from Engadget or CNET or so forth and so on. And you have to go find what are the best apps that I should download. We haven't really done a really terrific bang up job on discoverability on what's being built and what's even out there that has been funded. Because there's a lot of terrific platforms out there that have been funded and funded well, but they just can't find tribal identification. And so we have to have better ways of being able to bridge consumer to product, and at the same time to bridge startup to investor, and at the same time rudimentary to bridge founder to developer, founder to artist, founder to writers, founder to marketers, so forth and so on, sales agents. And so when we do that and start to work on that, then I think we'll have a better time and a better experience. Until then, it's going to continue to go in the direction that we're headed in. And it's a real shame because some people put their whole limited fortunes, which isn't a whole lot, or it could be, but it may be just about every penny they have into building really good tech. And so for me, a big part of what I've done, whether it's the immersive directory, to be able to create centralized locations where investors do go on that site, where people can actually go and be discovered and found. And so there needs to be more directories. There needs to be more people that have influence to highlight good platforms. And to be candid, I think that I can do more. It could do better towards highlighting more platforms individually. You know, those are some of the things that I'm looking at doing in certain specific spaces. And maybe I'll get to doing that in 2020. But there's so much that we're building on and doing right now. And so, you know, that's where we have to come together and utilize, you know, human resources.
Right. Yeah. So I guess we all making an effort. I mean, in our own ways, right? I mean, immersive directory, I think, is an excellent thing, right? I mean, even us. I mean, back over here with XROM, we doing somewhere. I mean, in the similar lines, right? XROM is a news platform. It's a podcast. Plus, it's a place where startups can list themselves. You know,
Yeah.
For jobs can kind of like post a job, things like that. So we need more of those platforms to kind of like push drive the ecosystem. So can you just tell me a little bit more about your other companies, your Flotilla and Armada? What are you doing, and what's the future for your companies and startups that you're building?
So with Flotilla, we have a serious focus with education this year for 2020. We got some things that are coming down the pipeline that we feel really good about and wanted to share. And as far as in the educational bracket, that we're hard at work on already. And as I said about with Holo-practice, we're building on the immersive wound, but we're also working in emergency services and creating some things with the emergency services community that we feel really excited about. And when it comes to the Armada, which is a human machine that builds technology, there's a lot of awesome things that we're working on right now that's in development that I feel really good about. I do have a book that's coming out in spring. I can't tell you the title right now. We'll be announcing it probably the end of February. But there is a book that's coming out in spring that I've been writing for some time now. I wrote 2 books, but one's coming out. I'm looking forward to sharing that and making sure that people can have a better sense of where we're headed when it comes to technology for the future and the present time. And so right now, the big focus and industry-wide is taking advantage of sight when it comes to virtual reality, taking advantage of the incremental steps of AR Core and AR Kit when it comes to augmented reality, and content creation and content development, making sure that we're developing it right with good design and sound design. And then more importantly, communication, more conferences, more meetings, more sessions, more think tanks. You guys are doing a terrific job with XROM. I think it's absolutely needed. And I look forward to seeing your growth and scale, especially in India. I think of all Asia, I think your platform is going to be, one of the significant platforms to look out for in the coming years, Eddie.
Thank you.
With the energy that you contribute to this industry that a lot of people don't know and haven't seen, but I've been looking at for some time now. I think it's necessary that we have drivers and leaders such as yourself and people like you and I come together with other colleagues, with other people that are building, to find out even better ways to explore the pathogens and the best approaches to communication to leverage other people's hopes and dreams and things that they want to build that contribute substantively to this entire habitat.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was a pleasure talking to you, Chris, and best luck for your book. I mean, we look forward for your book. So before we end, I mean, where does Chris Lafayette go from here? What's the future for him, and what's the future for AR/VR?
I think right now it's about when we're building the platforms that we're building, being that XR isn't the only technology that's emerging, we need to start thinking, how will our platforms interact with artificial intelligence, fintech, IoT, wearables, robots? We need to start thinking about how they interact with one another. So when you think about immersive technology, start thinking more on the lines of immersive intelligence. When you start thinking about fintech, maybe start thinking in lines of immersive fintech. Right? What does that world look like? When you start thinking about IoT and wearables, what does that look like with an artificially simulated, intelligent AI conduit that's part of it? Don't just build in the technology that you're building in. Build with technological convergence and the merge pairing in mind. And I think you will save yourself some time, and that you will save yourself or possibly save the future of your company, because if you're not doing it, other platforms will do it. And so for me, it's about continuing to move forward. And 2020 is a lot about climate change and climate correction and how we use technology to influence that. A lot of it is about the medical industry or health and wellness and what we're doing with spatial and AI and how we influence that industry and how we work with that industry and might serve it, and it serves what we're doing. And then a lot of it is about promoting building together, about talking about these things, about living and doing the things that we're talking about doing, and to be able to create better forms of communication and to provide better transparency and information to audiences that don't necessarily know about what so many people that I know that are building, and to help them get an audience for discoverability and to continue to drive this industry with as much care that's needed. And so those are some of the things that I'm doing right now and that I'll be looking at. And then the far future of XR will be, I think ultimately it's going to come down to congregating in digital spaces.
Right. Thank you, Chris. I mean, it was a pleasure talking to you. There's so much I got to know from you, right? You need to help each other, like you rightfully said, to grow the ecosystem, We living in a beautiful planet, and we all need to own up or take a responsibility, and if we want to make this planet better, not for ourselves, but the future generation. So we need to help each other and take care, because you need to take care in building the technology, because you need to understand that what we are building is we building for the future. It's for the future generation, for my kid, your kid, the future, right? So yes, I mean the future is experiential, and the technology is converging, and you need to be sure about what you're building and make sure that you reach out to these other technologies and create that marriage, which creates a better future. So on that note, thank you for being part of XRO podcast. Really, really appreciate this. And to my listeners, if you like what you see and hear, please press the subscribe button. I'm going to leave all the details of Mr. Chris down below so that you can reach out to him, and because it's about building a community. And until next time, see you guys. Bye bye. Thank you, Chris.